Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Hurricane Otis has battered Acapulco. We'll hear from someone here in BC with ties to the region. And Food Banks Canada finds more and more people are turning to them to fight hunger. Have you? And what's needed to reduce the demand for food banks? After 12:30, a discussion with a warning. We'll ask what supports are needed by survivors of sexual violence. The province has announced more funding. Is it enough? We'll be joined by the Battered Women's Support Services. Plus, your responses on the subject of real estate investment. I'm Michelle Eliot. Welcome to BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1, live streaming on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. Hurricane Otis is making its way across Mexico after slamming into the Acapulco region. It made landfall as a Category 5 storm, the strongest ever to do so in that country. And the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says there were sustained winds of 265 kilometers per hour. And officials warn of torrential rainfall leading to flash flooding. Otis is expected to dissipate as it makes its way across the northwest, across the state of Guerrero. The capital in that state is Chilpancingo, and that's where Claudia Camillo grew up before she moved to Burnaby 5 years ago. Claudia joins me now. Hello, good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon.
Thank you so much for joining us, Claudia. Can you describe the damage that, from what you've heard, has happened in your hometown?
Well, it has been suddenly. So I think they expected that there's gonna be a lot of rain, but they didn't know exactly how big it's gonna be until the news and the government said like it was going to be a hurricane. So everybody's there taking their precaution. So thank God my family lives a little like far of the town, and then there's too many mountains there where the people live. So some of the families are safe, but unfortunately, in the central part of our cities, they are suffering the most hard part of this time when there's not more. I mean, there's not allowed the people to go in there to the stores or their job places. I mean, workplaces, because it's the people cannot go into, the trees are falling. There are no internet or electricity there, so I mean hydro. So it has been causing too many cows there for the daily routines, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did hear that telecommunications was down. Glad to hear your family and relatives are safe. They still live in Chilpancingo. So tell us more about how they're doing then. You said that communication is difficult, unable to leave the house. What conversations have you been able to have? How have you stayed in communication?
Well, we still communicate via WhatsApp, of course. So it's not, the time it's normally we are 2 hours difference for our time zone, but at the same time it's like they send me message, but I don't see it until maybe 2 or 3 hours later when the connections are well. But for me it's good. At least I know like they're okay.
Right.
Of course, my nieces and my nephews, the children that are not in classes now, they're not in the school, but we try to keep those contact. I mean, there's now for today, my dad said like the communication on the internet is the government's trying to fix it and everything is getting normal. But at least in Acapulco, there's not any like any improvement in this situation. The hospitals need a lot of help, and there's not electricity, there's not internet, there's not telecommunication in any way. So I think Acapulco is the city's most affected from this hurricane at this point.
And I know you did send us some photos. We're going to put one up now. So if you're watching on our live stream, you can see it there. We're at cbc.ca/BC. And so this is a photo that was taken by your brother of a tree that fell down. And it really is. I mean, it's a huge tree. It's really just fallen right across the street there. Can you tell us more about this? Where was this taken?
Well, I'm assuming it's close to their home, because I know I've not visited them from alone. No, no, my brother specifically, their home. I mean his home, but I'm assuming it's in the street in the close in the way of the center of my town because I can recognize some houses there. But yeah, so of course this tree there it's affecting like the way how they can weigh their cars or they can get their homes or their workplaces because there's a big difference from here to there. Like sometimes the when you need the help from the I don't know firemen's or police station is not as quickly as is here. So
Mm,
it's I can see they are fighting a lot from this situation. Like they need to buy food. They need because in Mexico or the Latin American countries we used to buy our homes daily. I mean our groceries daily most of the time, and
right.
it's day by day. So this is affecting so much. So they cannot go everywhere. The stores are closed, and we don't know exactly how the government's gonna feed them. At least from those streets that they have these situations to pick up their groceries in the town.
How does it feel for you to be watching that here and as you say, knowing the differences when it comes to response and seeing what's happening from Burnaby?
Well, I've been in Canada for almost 6 years already, and I can see like when there is any incident or accident, or you call a 911, they come right away, and even you can count it's just 6, 7 minutes or more, and they already like rushing like this is an emergency, right? But at least when I was in Mexico and I had to call and to do all of these things, um, it was a little very um difficult for us because we know already that gonna take more time. So or sometimes gonna be 30 minutes, 20 minutes. You never know, right?
Yeah. How do you feel
So
about that?
yeah, no, but it's I don't know, it's part of the culture maybe. I don't know. I think it's more the organization that we have in our country with our government and how they deal with this kind of situation. That is something that
Mm.
too many people move from our home's country to countries like Canada or USA because we look these opportunities to have a safe life, right? And to have a response from our problems.
And so, in light of that, has there been any lobbying, or how has the community there been responding then, or trying to get more of that support?
Well, that's something really, I can say, good, and it's something that the Latin people or Mexican people, at least in my area, have. Like we are always allowed to serve others, to help each other, and if we see one of our neighbors need our help, we're gonna allow to do, and we are not gonna think about it. So if my neighbor needs food, I know I'll be limiting my own home, but I'm not gonna let my neighbor alone. So I think it's something good, but at the same time, it's something that we should do together, government and people in cities and everybody, right? So not just us.
Claudia, what's next for you then as you watch what's happening?
What is the next?
Yeah.
Um, well, I don't know. I just want to. Well, for me, next month I'm thinking to visit my family now.
Mm.
Um, that's something that I have in my plans, like to look this opportunity to visit my family every year. Uh, but for now, after this, I don't know exactly. I'm just praying for them because I don't know exactly what is gonna happen, right? So it's hard to say I'll bring some help or I'll help them
Mm.
with this because there's no way that I can do something from here.
Well, I really appreciate your joining us and telling us about the situation there for your family and others. Thank you so much for being on the show.
No, thank you for inviting me, and I just want to say thank you for this space, for this time that you give us to share what is happening in our city. And of course, we really need that the people can realize how important it's for them, for the Mexican people at this point in Acapulco, especially, that they need help, that they really need a lot of support because this is not the first time. We already passed this with the Hurricane Paulina, and fortunately this is not going to happen again, hopefully no, but we don't want these things can go worse, right? So thank you
Mm,
so much for your time and for everything. Thank
yeah,
you.
that was in 1997, Hurricane Paulina. Claudia, thank you. I appreciate your sharing your time with us. Take care. All the best to you.
Thank you.
Claudia Camillo is from the Chilpancingo, the state capital of Guerrero, and we reached her in Burnaby, where she's lived, as she said, for the past 6 years. It's 16 minutes past 12 o'clock now, past 1 o'clock in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today here on CBC. Well, here at home, food bank visits this past March hit an unprecedented level with 1.9 million trips across Canada. In BC, there were more than 196,000 visits that month. And this information is from the annual Hunger Report from Food Banks Canada, out today. And people who filled out the survey said that the main reasons were rising food and housing costs, low wages, and just not enough hours of work. And so while food banks were created as a temporary measure, our reliance on them has only increased. We're asking you, have you turned to a food bank this year? And what's needed to reduce the demand for food banks? You can call us on the open line, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email to bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining me here in our studio is Paul Agace. He's a coordinator and poverty law advocate with the Prince Rupert Unemployment Action Center. Paul, good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Michelle.
From your vantage point in Prince Rupert, what need are you seeing for services like the food bank?
Well, the most vulnerable folks are being taken care of. The province has really stepped up. The thing, poverty has expanded. Expanded in the middle class, lower middle class, single income family earners. So, I think we're doing a great job taking care of our most vulnerable, as we should. But the people using food banks has expanded. It's people with full-time jobs. And the rents are out of control there. I mean, I don't have to tell Vancouver this. This is the story throughout the province.
Yes.
So when you have 1 to 2% vacancy rates and rents, basic housing starting at $1,500, $2,000, this is, and it's just going to increase as long as the rents are the way they are.
Well, that's exactly what the food bank's report found, right? That they're hearing from people who are employed full-time, who are returning to food banks. And so is it just about food costs then? You talk about housing, we hear about low wages. How do all of those intersect with food insecurity?
Well, as a legal advocate, I do a lot of income security. So I do income assistance, employment insurance, work safe, employment standards. And the reason we do all the income security is because people need to pay their rents. Housing's their core need. So the reason I'm trying to find people money and through various systems of government and chains of government is so they can maintain the housing. But affordable housing, it's considered, if you're spending more than 30%
Right.
on your income on housing, it's not affordable. So you have people working full-time jobs, some professionals. Like I know nurses, I know school teachers where they're the single income earner for their family, and they can afford to live in a place like Prince Rupert. And I know it's crazy here, so.
Well, Paul, I see just in your eyes how stunned you are just having to say that. Who's coming to mind for you as you speak about this? What are your feelings about that?
So our office sees there's two advocates, and we see about 1,200 to 1,300 people a year coming in. and I would say 60% of them are over 55. And what's interesting, the people come in my office are people that haven't been on income assistance before. They're seniors, they may be around 60, their job has been phased out or it's been reduced, and they're trying to get in the market. And it's just tricky, but it's grocery store clerks, it's restaurant workers, it's everybody. It's not, you can't stereotype who's using the food bank. And a lot of people don't want their business known, especially in smaller communities. There's still stigmas, unfortunately, around this.
Is that preventing some people from going to fight their hunger?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to say embrace it and just accept it.
Sure. But
the reality is some people want to be private. So how are those needs being reached? And I just never surprise who comes in my office and who's in need. So we just help everybody.
You raise a really good point there about stigma, and especially in rural communities. I want to ask you more about that in just a moment. My guest is Paula Gase, coordinator and poverty law advocate with the Prince Rupert Unemployment Action Center. In light of a food bank's report out today, just saying an unprecedented need is what they're seeing, especially this past March at food banks across the country. We're asking you, have you turned to a food bank this year? And what's needed to reduce the demand for food bank services? Our phone numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. And Brendan is calling us from Surrey. Hi, Brendan. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you very much.
What did you want to say about food banks and trying to reduce our reliance on them?
I just heard some comments that people who use food banks and did surveys commented that prices go up, housing costs and living costs goes up, and wages are not. And some people commented they simply didn't have enough working hours. And that last comment struck me, because that's exactly what my case was when I moved to the Lower Mainland. And I just feel like there's something in the culture nowadays. Like, you can say what you like about there's drugs and there's laziness. Okay, maybe, like, that's a different topic we need to work on. But also just how it seems like we prioritize the economy, and in politics, everything's about the economy and just making more money. And the employers just focus on the profit margin. I talked to my wife and I said, look, the goal in life is to have value is more than the profit. It's what's sustainable. Right? Sustainable for the environment and the economy. Like, if employers are actually nasty enough to want to give less than minimum wage to employees, then we don't need to have minimum wage.
Well, that would be breaking the rules, right? If they were paying less than minimum wage. Is this something you've experienced personally, Brendan?
No, what I've experienced personally is I feel like when employers on the job market like on Indeed.com or something have higher wages per hour, they end up giving you less hours than they claim to give you.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Brendan. And you know that we've seen this rise in, we call it the gig economy. You could see it as precarious employment. How much of that is?
I quit DoorDash. DoorDash was the worst.
You did delivery.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what was that like for you then in terms of trying to make an income?
Oh, it was a crime. Like you can read about it. There's like a movie out about it. Like, if you have to repair your car or your bicycle, you calculate the cost you made from it. You can work all night long and you make less than minimum wage, like, after you've subtracted your costs.
Your costs, yeah. Okay, Brendan, thank you very much for the call. He's using hyperbole there with crime, but it's very hard for people dealing with what we call the gig economy, right? Part-time work.
Yeah. Well, the minimum wage, we need a living wage. Let's just mandate.
What's the difference?
Living wage is indexed according to a community, and it's based on a number of factors. It basically says you need this much to get by, and so that would be a start. Like, that's not even going to solve everything, but that's a start. mandate that.
Living wage versus minimum wage. So filling that gap. Thanks so much for that call again from Surrey. Let's head to Sydney now. And Brenda is on the line. Hi, Brenda.
It's Bernadette, actually, Michelle.
Oh, hi, Bernadette. Thanks for calling.
Yeah, hi, Michelle. Listen, this is such an important subject. And I do think, like there's more demand on food bank at the moment. And I participated in the CBCs, when you do it every year. I love that day. But there's more demand, like the students, there's all kinds of people who never before went to food banks. And I feel that, where governments are overly reliant on these things. And I also feel like they're overly reliant on all the volunteerism that goes on. You know how we raise money to put different kinds of technological machines in hospitals and that kind of thing. And really, our tax dollars should be dealing with that, and our medical system's failing as well. So where governments are relying a lot more on different non-governmental organizations and charities to do things. And I'd like to see the government showing us their balance sheet and where they spend their money, exactly where it goes, and I suppose we can have access to that, but it would be nice to know how. But in general, I think it's sad, and there's a lot of people suffering with all of these things that are impacting on the situation, that people are really suffering now.
Yeah. Bernadette, thank you so much. Good to hear from you in Sydney. You take care, okay?
Yes, thanks very much, Michelle.
That's Bernadette in Sydney. We actually have an email from Scott that is along the same vein. And Scott writes, food banks unfortunately represent a policy failure by governments to support the basic needs of citizens. A solution would be a 1% citizen real estate dividend distributed equally to every child and adult in BC. Scott, thank you very much for your email. bctoday@cbc.ca is our email address. And Paul, just before we go to the news update here, what do you make of that, right? And I heard a spokesperson from Food Banks, the Food Bank Canada this morning, BC rather, this morning, say we were meant to be a temporary measure. We were never meant to be here now. And so when food banks are growing, how does that affect the pressure on governments to come up with policies like what you said, address the need among those who are working?
Yeah, I think it really just comes back to they got to keep working at getting rents under control in every province, because that's where that's the root of the thing. And certainly governments like the federal government has the reach at home. I know a lot of food security monies go into that in various communities. We just really need to keep raising the budgets for those. And there's nonprofit organizations are stepping up doing food that were never really intended, like more churches and more, mosques in different places that weren't, it's not going away. The idea of poverty is not going away because it's expanded. And wow, this is 2023. This is where we're at.
That's what Bernadette was talking about. More NGOs, more community services and volunteer services filling those gaps. We'll go back with Paula Gase in just a moment, just to talk a little bit more about that expanding need for food banks across Canada. And also, in a few minutes, we're going to hear from the Battered Women Support Services of Vancouver and BC in light of some new supports and added funding that the provincial government announced last week. Is it going to be enough? And what supports do survivors of sexual violence need? And it's going to be a difficult conversation. Just a warning there. We'll put some phone lines up for you as well, crisis lines if you need support. We'll put them up for you if you do watch or listen to that conversation. That's coming up in about 10 minutes from now. Right now, let's pause for a news update. And here is Robert Zimmerman from the CBC Vancouver newsroom.
Good afternoon. TransLink says its public transit system is facing a growing deficit. It says it's looking at a funding shortfall of $4.7 billion in a decade if new sources of revenue aren't found. CEO Kevin Quinn says the financial pressures come from declining fuel tax revenues, inflation, and the ending of pandemic relief funding. India's High Commission has announced starting tomorrow it will resume processing visa applications in Ottawa and at consulates in Toronto and here in Vancouver. It's been more than a month since the Indian government suspended those services. Followed a statement in the House of Commons by the Prime Minister that the Indian government may have been involved in the murder of a pro-Khalistan activist here in BC. And about 17,000 hydro customers are without power after strong winds brought down branches and trees overnight in several areas of the province. At the peak, a total of about 100,000 homes and businesses were affected. The majority of remaining outages are on southern Vancouver Island. And now taking a look at the forecast on the north coast, mainly sunny and windy this afternoon with a high of 6. Highs to -7 and mainly cloudy in the Peace. In the central interior, mainly sunny with a high of -2. Highs to 6 degrees and mainly cloudy in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, clearing this afternoon with a high of 4. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria and the Fraser Valley, some sunshine with highs to 11 degrees. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Michelle with BC Today.
Thank you very much, Rob. Robert Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. You're with BC Today here on CBC. You can listen to us on the radio, 88.1 FM in Metro Vancouver. You can watch us online, cbc.ca/BC. On CBC Gem, use that service, or you can watch us on YouTube. CBC Vancouver is how you can find us. And we've been talking about the need and demand for food banks. Today's annual hunger report from Food Banks Canada finds that there were more than 196,000 visits in BC in March of this year. They say it's an unprecedented need. And people said the main reasons they were visiting food banks was because of rising food and housing costs, low wages, or just not enough hours of work. We've been asking you if you have turned to a food bank this year and what's needed to reduce the demand for food banks in BC. And my guest has been Paul Legace, a coordinator and poverty law advocate with the Prince Rupert Unemployment Action Centre. And let's take a call now from Tim in Kamloops. Hi, Tim. What are your thoughts on food banks?
Hey there. Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm very fortunate. I've never had to use a food bank. That doesn't mean down the road, who knows? But one of the couple very quick things. One of the things I think you may need to do is, especially federally and provincially, is having, and I know this is going to sound silly and naive to many people, a Ministry of Food Banks. I know you have poverty reduction ministries, you have Ministry of Social Development,
right,
but this is something I think you're going to have to need. Remember, food banks supposedly were going to be a temporary stopgap measure in the 1980s, and that turned out to be the biggest lie ever. And yet at the same time, you're also going to have the rise of low-income seniors as well as other issues, automation, job issues. And as well, maybe that's why you're going to have to start looking at a universal basic income, even though people might be really violently opposed to it. But again, I think you need to start getting a Ministry of Food Banks. I don't care if it sounds naive or dumb. I think this is something you need to start looking at, or society does.
I don't think it sounds dumb at all, nor naive. Tim, thank you very much for the call. Really appreciate that. All you're saying is more attention to food banks and the demand for them and why that is. What are your thoughts on his suggestions there? His point is that really focus that attention on food security.
Yeah, I sit on the Moving Forward Steering Committee with the advocates and Ministry of Social Development, and I think there should be, they really maybe need to expand what food supplements are on income assistance and identify that as, I know they've been increasing the amounts, and we're getting a bit better, but maybe a basic food supplement and index those things to inflation. Like, so I think the Ministry of Social Development can. I'll bring it up maybe at their next meeting.
I know you're in town. This is why you're in Vancouver. You're here for a conference. And lastly, you're from Prince Rupert. We saw, for example, the impact of the wildfires on the interior and the Peace, the northeast in the summer, and people having to, their food going bad, getting spoiled that they had in their homes. How are rural communities in particular affected?
It's very tricky. I mean, you have a lot of people living on the land, certainly in the north.
Yeah.
And we're in rainy Prince Rupert. We're actually one of the safest places in Canada, but everything else has been rough, and it's been a tough year on folks. And certainly the food security of the hunting and those on the land have not been able. So again, it's just another reason why people need to use food banks.
That's what we're hearing today, Paul. I really appreciate your coming to talk to us about this. Thanks so much.
A real pleasure. Thank you.
Good to see you. Paula Gase, coordinator and poverty law advocate with the Prince Rupert Unemployment Action Center. And Paul is here in Vancouver as he's here in town for a conference of poverty law advocates. It's 12:36 now, 1:36 in the Mountain Time Zone. Thanks so much for joining us here on BC Today on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming as well. I'm Michelle Eliot. Very nice to be with you this afternoon. Well, last week, BC's Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General Mike Farnworth announced more services for victims of gender-based violence and other violent crime. The Crime Victim Assistance Act began in 2002 and has grown to support victims of crime, violence against women, and sexual assault programs throughout BC. The expansion includes restoring funding that was previously cut for those sexual assault programs in cities like Vancouver, Victoria, Kamloops, Prince George, and Surrey. And it's part of ongoing work by different provincial ministries to help prevent, address, and respond to gender-based violence. We're asking, though, if that goes far enough to make a difference. The BC Prosecution Service has started to track intimate partner violence stats in its annual report for last year, and the numbers you can see is shocking. An average of 36 cases every day in the province are being recommended for criminal charges by Crown Counsel, and that is only cases going to trial. The numbers are far higher for what's being reported to police and crisis lines across the province. Now, we are also going to put to you the help that is out there before we launch our conversation. For BC and the Yukon, you can text or call Victim Link BC. You can see the numbers on our live stream as well. The numbers are 1-800-563-0808, 1-800-563-0808. You can email victimlinkbc@bc211.ca. You can also call the Battered Women's Support Services crisis line, and that is 1-855-687-1868. Now, according to the Ministry of Public Safety, they recognize the scale of the problem, saying gender-based violence happens in communities of every kind, urban and rural, at work, at school, and in the home. And in addition to working on a long-term action plan, they say they've made progress on a number of fronts, including funding more programs and shelters and establishing provincial standards for investigating sexual assault. Now, to get a sense of what's working and what more is needed, we have reached Angela Marie McDougall, the Executive Director of the Battered Women's Support Services Society. Angela Marie, good afternoon.
Hello, Michelle. Lovely to chat with you again.
Well, it's very good to speak with you again. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
What was your reaction to the province's announcement last week, first of all, the expansion of crime victim assistance programs?
Yeah, so we have known that they were working on increasing services and expanding the kind of service in terms of a community-based service for victims of sexual assault. So we've known this was coming, and we were aware of the call for proposals, and also, you know, our colleagues around the province that were successful. So this is a good thing. This is a really good thing around looking at sexual assault. And it's part of the government's priority. That was their policy priority that they've had for the last several years. I think we're probably maybe into 7 years now with sexual assault services, expanding those services. As you mentioned at the top, that the funding had been cut in previous years. So that reinstatement and this expansion has been really welcomed and important.
And does it go far enough to make up for those shortfalls? As you said, it was the funding was cut beforehand.
Well, so what is a problem in that and a miss in this is intimate partner violence. You know, sexual assault is one form of gender-based violence. Domestic and intimate partner violence are another. And so the umbrella term gender-based violence is the term that I know that gets used, but we have to look at the kind of violence. And intimate partner violence is not a policy priority right now for the province of British Columbia. It hasn't been for several years.
What do you mean?
It's not a policy priority. It's not written into the mandate letters. It is not part of what that the government's looking at in terms of increasing funding, increasing services, or even addressing. And we're coming out of COVID-19 where we saw tremendous increases in the reports of intimate partner violence, and that prosecution, the prosecutor's office, that the report that you mentioned at the top,
Yes.
it's speaking very specifically about intimate partner violence and the huge numbers. So it's a huge gap, a big miss, and it is something that we definitely need to see the government change direction on. And this is what we seek to invite them to do.
And why is that specificity needed? What is the specific support that victims of intimate partner violence need?
Well, we would have hoped that that we are always trying to walk and chew gum at the same time. So while we're increasing services to sexual assault, we don't ignore intimate partner violence. I mean, so that's a troubling fact that happened through the last few years. And it matters because of how femicide is the killings, which is the far end of the spectrum of intimate partner violence. And we've had an increase in killings here in the province with women that have been killed by their male partners. And for every woman that's killed, there are thousands more that are living in fear. And so that's the part where we know that community-based response is really, really good. As all the reports tell us, and we know, from our experience, that victims of violence don't go to the police. They go to friends and family. They go to a community-based organization. And so there's real opportunity for some big increases in support and really preventing violence. There is lots of evidence to show that when a victim gets the chance to connect with a community organization, their ability to get safer and to prevent femicide increases, incredibly, and that there's very, very few instances where where somebody that's been connected to a community-based organization then gets killed. So this is something that we know works, and we have to see the provincial government taking action on this. And you mentioned you mentioned that the Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General Mike Farnworth, he had indicated that they're working on a provincial plan. This provincial plan has to, without doubt, prioritize intimate partner violence because it's been neglected for the last few years, and we've seen increases. I mean, these numbers have been well established through COVID, and they haven't gone down. We've stayed steady, and so we wish that we didn't have to parse off gender-based violence in this way. We wish that we could have a full attention to all aspects, because that's how that it exists in the lives of victims all across the province. But one of the things that's really different about sexual assault in and of itself and intimate partner violence, and we talk about the term survivor, we have to use the term victim and survivor kind of at the same time, because sometimes women don't survive. And that is, we just heard of a brutal, horrible shooting, that happened in Northern Ontario. And we've had similar things happen here in British Columbia in the last few years. So we want to see the provincial government course correct on this. In the next, within the next year. I believe they are in negotiations. It's been reported from the federal government that they're in negotiations with the provinces and territories in order to fund an action plan. We expect to see, the provincial government, in that negotiation, and we're hoping that will get to get some good results that will increase funding for community-based services that are making a huge difference all across the province.
You referred to the numbers during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic with regard to intimate partner violence and the rise there. I remember those reports, and you say it's not gone down. Why do you think it's not been a priority? I mean, you would be speculating here, but why do you think it's being lumped together with a more general term?
Well, and this is what I this is what I do all day, and really in the sense of speaking with our, with our, with the staff within the various ministries that fund services that have the policy responsibility for these issues, and of course with our elected people. I have this conversation all the time, much to their dismay, probably, in the sense of how much I'm digging this note, and I'm not the only one. I know that there are provincial associations in the province that have that conversation as well. I don't know, Michelle, why it has not been a priority. I don't understand it. And all I can do is to continue to ding that note, point to the evidence which they want to see, continue to support our team and all the teams that are around the province that are doing that frontline work. And hopefully that we will see some announcements coming at some point that will be about this provincial plan that will seek to redress what I think has been a policy failure.
Something that I noted in the press release for last week's announcement, was a focus on culturally safe. How important is that in, whatever is in that action plan to deal with this?
Really important. One of the factors that we, through some of the research that we've done through two reports that we were a part of, looking at the relationship between culture and race and communities of color and Indigenous communities, and what it means, what the kinds of the extended barriers that victims and survivors that are racialized, Indigenous, Black, immigrant experience in accessing services, and in that kind of the kind of isolation that is about being a part of communities that are already experiencing kinds of marginalizations within the broader society, and then that creates challenges when victims are trying to reach supports, and it does compound the vulnerability in the sense of not being able to access community supports. But it's also for communities that are in rural communities as well, because of the isolation and the transportation. And so these are the things that matter. We want those words, culturally safe services, to actually mean something, not to be a throwaway line. I mean, words on a page actually have to translate into some action. And that's another piece of work that we're doing with the province as well, is, what does that mean? And for us, we know it means language-specific services. We know that it means recognizing the particular vulnerabilities in terms of isolation that communities of color can have within the broader society. And so, we are certainly in those conversations with the province always, and we want them for this to be meaningful.
Angela Marie, it's just occurring to me as well. We've been having conversations around housing, through on the show here, and you're nodding as I speak to you and shaking your head, because what role does housing play in safety?
Well, no housing, no escape. I mean, frankly, we are in a time right now where, there are literally victims of violence who aren't able to leave, aren't able to flee. The transition houses are full. The affordable housing is near non-existent. And, we're struck with this, this kind of convergence of challenges around income, affordability, and violence. And so we're certainly pushing hard around the housing front. We know that, and I've seen, with our own experience at Battery Women Support Services, how difficult it is to see affordable housing come online. It's really challenging to have affordable housing that would take into consideration incomes, lower, that could afford rents that are, under $2,000 a month, which is the majority of victims of violence that we're seeing, and how difficult that is to actually see housing, rental housing that has rents, that are under that rate, combined with the fact that so many victims of violence are dealing, once they leave abusive relationships, they can be really tied through family law and through agreements made through the separation, where they're not able to relocate because of the abusive partner, perhaps, holding power through the family law system. And so they're really tied to their, to inaffordable housing. And there's so many systemic challenges that require a whole full court press attention to each one as it impacts victims of intimate partner and domestic violence. And this is what we seek to do each and every day through our organization, and then certainly through our advocacy with our provincial government and beyond.
You work on this every day, Angela Marie. Do you see any hope?
I see hope every day in all of the survivors that are reaching out. It's incredible to see how many women, how many victims of violence are accessing support services, who are, staying the course, that are fighting the system that seeks to harm them in lots of ways and prevent their ability to thrive. And we want to be there, and it's our role to be walk beside and to help, shape a path for survivors to ensure safety. And hold the system accountable when it creates barriers, which it's, so for a long time, there's been all these barriers that have prevented, gender equality and, and liberation. So this is what we are working on every day. And I feel really encouraged by so many victims and survivors and their children who are managed to move through violence, with support and fighting the system, dealing with the legal issues, dealing with the housing challenges, and working toward thriving. And it's amazing. And I think about my grandmother, who would never have been able to have left her abusive husband. I think about my mother, who struggled in dealing with abusive partners. I think about so many of other previous generations of women who were, and women that are in their 80s and above, who tell us, I wish that I could have had an organization like yours, when I was in my 20s. I would never have, done this or that. So we know its services are important, and that gives me hope each and every day.
Angela Marie, it is very, very good to speak with you this afternoon. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Michelle. I wish you all the best.
You too. Angela Marie McDougall is the Executive Director of the Battered Women's Support Society. And if you or someone you know needs help, here are the numbers to call. For BC and the Yukon, you can text or call Victim Link BC. That's 1-800-563-0808. Or you can email victimlinkbc@bc211.ca. You can call the Battered Women's Support Services crisis line at 1-855-687-1868. And we do have those numbers up on our live stream as well. $12:53 now, 1:53 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today. Well, the BC government is taking aim at short-term rentals and limiting them to units within a property owner's home or an added unit on that same property. That's for major areas with populations of 10,000 or more. Their aim, they say, is to return those units to long-term rentals. And yesterday, we asked you, what impact is real estate as an investment having on you and on housing in BC? We were joined by a Stats Canada senior analyst, a tenant advocate, and a personal finance columnist. An update to that story now, too. The official opposition party, BC United, is proposing amendments to that legislation, the proposed legislation, including allowing people to operate a short-term rental on another property if they don't already have an STR unit in their home. After our show yesterday, we kept getting comments via email, and here are some of them now. Clayton writes, I have recently come across the results of a survey which stated that Canadians are the only people in the Western world who view purchasing or owning a home and property as, first and foremost, a financial investment and not as something to be used as a personal dwelling. Could a restructuring of how we view what the purchase of a house is in this country and moving it more toward a personal investment rather than a financial investment aid in tamping this market, which has become unattainable for so many people here? Killian writes from Victoria, it's good if real estate becomes a poor investment for someone not living on the property. Homes should be for the people who live in them and not for padding people's bank accounts. It should be the government's job to build rental properties for those who can't or can't easily buy their own place, especially to build co-ops. Aaron writes, we rent in Vancouver, where we need to be based for our work in the arts sector. In 2021, we purchased a cottage on the Sunshine Coast. We live in our cottage part-time, visit about once a month, and when we are not there, we rent it out to respectful couples and families for a maximum of half the year. We rent to help offset property costs, and our rental rates are some of the lowest in the area. We are not the profit-driven STR owners making a killing that the NDP says they are targeting, but we are getting swept away with these proposed regulations. We're proud to support a sustainable tourism industry that brings $200 million in direct and indirect revenue to the Sunshine Coast. And Ray in Pemberton writes, one of the biggest reasons for rampant housing costs is that people and companies own more than one home. If you are wanting to buy your own home, you are competing with these investors. This competition drives prices up. Individuals should not be allowed to own more than 2 single detached houses or condos, and companies, 0. Corporations should only be allowed to own apartment buildings. New laws should be enacted stating any sales of existing homes and condos should only be allowed to individuals that don't already own more than 2 homes. Valerie writes, I have a suite in my house in Victoria, which I rent out for periods of 30 to 120 days. Renters are generally here for a fixed-term work or study assignment or are transferring here permanently and use my place as a temporary accommodation while they look for long-term accommodation. Over the past 2 years, the majority of my renters have been doctors. Under the proposed legislation, the definition of short-term would be increased to 90 days from 30. And the implication for me is that I must increase my minimum stay to over 90 days in order to continue offering rentals. I will make that change. However, I do worry about what that means for people looking for stays in an autonomous suite for a period of 30 to 90 days. And Justin writes, out of one side of their face, the politician says, vote for me, renters. I will freeze rents at 2%. Then the Bank of Canada increases rates and everybody from plumbers to electricians get hit by inflation. If a small landlord cannot pass more than 2% of these increases, then many just give up and sell. Being a small landlord is so unappealing in BC, the only people that would buy a small fourplex stay would be a developer. Thank you so much for all of your emails. bctoday@cbc.ca is where you can reach us. And you can also email us with your photos of your Halloween displays. Thanks to Shane Moskrip and Prince George for these photos of a Star Wars themed display on a front lawn. So do send them to us, bctoday@cbc.ca. We'll draw for a BC Today prize pack at the end of the week. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thank you so much for joining us, emailing us too, and watching us. Have a great afternoon.